When I was a child, my father told me to look at my hands and realize they were the same as any other person's. He told me that when I grew up, what would separate me from every other person, what separates each of us from every other person, is how we choose to spend our time using them. Today, when I think of war, when I think of this war, I do not think of soldiers dressed in green or grey. I think of hands. White hands and brown hands, big ones and small ones, women's hands and children's hands and men's hands. For what was this war if it was not fingers resting on triggers, fingers pressed to buttons, dropping bombs, hands grasped tightly around the handle of a spade or the wheel of a tank, digging trenches, holding gas masks over faces or held straight to foreheads in salute? And what was this war if it was not a mother's palms reaching up, cupping a son's face, palms pressed together and raised like psalms to God or lowered to benches, shaping biscuit dough? And what was this war if it was not brothers carried, clasped to backs across minefields, hands throwing footballs into minefields turned sports fields, lifting flagpoles, waving pride or regret? This war was more than the black hand that ignited it and the hands thrown up in surrender that ended it. To me, it was humans dead on both sides, bleeding the same red, the same hands rendered useless. To me, there is nothing more tragic than the image of hands with so much potential to create, to express humanity, forced for a short time only to destroy before becoming too stiff and too cold to lift tools or each other. I learned in primary school that humans are made in God's image. To me, the greatest evidence of this is that just as God flooded the world with a wave of his hands, humans too have cried 100 years worth of tears, of pain and anguish over this war. And we have created oceans. There are seas of graves separating each side. But if we grasp the oars tightly enough, perhaps we can row ourselves across to meet each other on this 100 years since the guns fell silent. Let us remember those who fell and those who are left behind and what they lived for and what they died for peace. This war, if nothing else, was one of the greatest examples of man's potential for destruction in human history. But it was also one of the greatest examples of how that destruction can inspire creation. All we have to do to see evidence of that is look at the fields in front of us. It was human hands who killed the men those crosses represent. And it was human hands who laid that field, who built the buildings that stand behind me. When we look at that field, when we look at these buildings, when we think of this war, I hope we can think of the hands that fought it. Remembering only in Armistice can we move forward. I hope we can remember that it was these men, our men, whose hands built the rockets that put man on the moon, whose hands broke down the Berlin Wall, liberated Auschwitz, liberated us. And lest we forget that. Thank you.